In 1845, Sir John Franklin set out from England to finish a map the British Empire wanted badly, a sea route through the Arctic. He led 2 Royal Navy ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, and he did not sail as a gambler. He sailed as a man who trusted planning, hierarchy and experience. The mission sounded simple in London. Go north, find the passage, come home. Franklin carried confidence that felt modern for its time. The ships had been reinforced for ice, and they relied on new technology meant to reduce old risks. Canned food promised steady meals without hunting. Steam engines, used as auxiliary power, promised movement when wind failed. Everything pointed to control. Even the crew's routine mattered. Strict naval discipline, clear orders, and a chain of command designed to hold steady under pressure. That belief in control shaped every choice made before the Arctic even appeared on the horizon. Franklin expected machines to fill gaps where nature usually won. He expected supplies to last and procedures to keep men efficient and obedient. The expedition left England carrying not just equipment, but certainty, and certainty was dangerous. Because once those ships entered ice and distance, there would be no quick rescue, no easy retreat, and no room for mistakes. The 2 ships pushed past the last familiar harbours and entered the Canadian Arctic, where charts thinned out and certainty ended. Each mile north narrowed the options for turning back. Franklin's plan depended on movement, short Arctic seasons, clear channels, steady progress, but the further they sailed, the more the expedition relied on conditions they could not control: wind, temperature, and the timing of freeze-up. Near the edge of Baffin Bay, whalers crossed their path and recorded the last confirmed sighting. It looked ordinary enough. 2 Royal Navy ships continuing west, still on schedule, still intact, and that was the final time outsiders knew where they were. After that, there were no ports, no mail routes, no rescue stations. Once the ships slipped into the maze of Arctic channels, they carried their own fate with them. From there, the expedition moved beyond practical help. Ice could close behind them as easily as it opened ahead, sealing off the route they had just used. A delay of days could become a season, and a season could become a trap. The channels offered promise on paper, but they punished hesitation and rewarded luck. Then the record went silent. Erebus and Terror disappeared into the ice-choked waterways and did not come back out. By the winter of 1846, the expedition stopped being a journey and became a standoff. Erebus and Terror reached the waters off King William Island, and then the sea closed around them. Ice pressed in, locked tight, and refused to let go. The ships did not drift free with the next change in weather. They stayed pinned in place, day after day, as if anchored by the Arctic itself. That mattered because everything depended on movement. The plan assumed the ships carried the men through the remaining gaps in the map. Once trapped, every advantage shrank. Coal and food still existed, but they had to last longer than expected. Fresh meat became uncertain. Work turned into maintenance and routine because routine kept order. But the biggest problem stayed simple. No one knew when the ice would release them, if it ever did. So the crews waited, and waiting changed the rules of survival. Each week in the same spot meant more wear on bodies and more strain on supplies that had been counted in months, not endless seasons. The ships became stationary camps surrounded by a barrier that could not be negotiated or sailed around. Exploration paused, then stalled completely. By the end of that winter, the Arctic siege already had a direction. It pointed inward. In 1847, the ice still held, and the winter did what it always did best. It turned time into an enemy. The men lived on fixed routines and fixed rations, but bodies started failing anyway. Illness did not arrive as one dramatic event. It arrived as a slow tally. First, a few were too weak to work, then they stayed below, then they did not come back up. Deaths hit harder than the numbers suggested, because every loss removed a skill the group depended on. A man who knew how to keep the stoves working. A man who could help navigate, repair, or manage stores. Each death forced others to take on more, while already running on less food, less strength, and less hope. The system that held the crews together started bending under strain. As the list of the dead grew, morale dropped in a way discipline could not simply correct. Authority still existed, but it started to feel thinner, like it relied on habit more than confidence. The officers could order tasks, but they could not order health, warmth, or daylight. The expedition had been built to move forward. Now it stayed trapped, and the first major blow landed right inside the chain of command. On June 11, 1847, Sir John Franklin died. It happened after months in which death already started to thin the crews and unsettle the order they depended on. Now the expedition lost its commander in the middle of an Arctic trap it still could not break. The men faced a new reality. The plan that brought them here no longer had its central authority. The question became immediate and practical. Who decided what happened next? Leadership passed to Francis Crozier and James Fitzjames. Crozier carried seniority and experience, and Fitzjames held command on the other ship. Together they inherited 2 crews, 2 frozen vessels, and 1 narrowing set of options. But taking command did not mean taking control. Every decision now had a sharper edge. Supplies had to be counted against time. Strength had to be measured against distance. The expedition still waited for the ice to change, but waiting started to look like its own gamble. Franklin's death changed how risk felt. Under him, discipline and procedure had carried weight, even as conditions worsened. Under Crozier and Fitzjames, survival demanded colder math. A bold move could save lives or end them faster. A cautious move could preserve order or simply delay collapse. The remaining officers had to judge men who were tired, sick, and grieving, then decide whether to keep trusting the ships as shelter or prepare for a future beyond them. On April 22, 1848, the expedition finally left a clear message behind. At a place called Victory Point, a written note was deposited to be found later, if anyone ever came. It stated the basic truth the crews could not escape. The ships had been trapped since 1846. 2 full years locked in place. The note turned uncertainty into record. It marked the moment the situation became official, undeniable, and permanent. That note did more than report bad news. It carried an order. Erebus and Terror were to be abandoned. This was a decision naval expeditions avoided at almost any cost, because a ship was shelter, storage, and the only reliable base in the Arctic. But the ice did not release them, and time kept taking men away. The message told any future reader that waiting had ended. The crews shifted from endurance to escape. By leaving the note at Victory Point, the remaining officers chose a fixed point in the landscape to anchor their last plan. If rescue ever happened, this was where an explanation waited. It meant they accepted that they might not return to the ships, and that their fate now depended on moving away from them. The order to abandon Erebus and Terror did not promise survival. It admitted the ships could no longer provide it. They left the ships behind and stepped onto the ice with no real way back. 105 men remained. They carried what they thought could keep them alive: food, tools, weapons, and the things a naval mind trusted: order, lists, and procedure. They also hauled boats, dragged like sledges, because open water still meant a chance. From that moment, the goal changed. They no longer waited for the ice to release them. The march began as a calculation. South meant land that rose and fell, routes that might open, and eventually a river that led out of the trap. But every mile demanded effort they did not have to spare. Boats and supplies did not slide on hope. They needed muscle. The men had to keep moving while still camping, still eating, still staying warm enough to function. The slow pace turned urgency into a grind. Their new plan aimed at the Back River, a long, hard line on the map that promised a corridor towards safety. It was not an easy escape route. It was simply the only direction that still looked like a route at all. Reaching it meant weeks of hauling across rough ice and shoreline, with strength draining day by day. The decision to walk made survival depend on bodies that were already failing, and there was no ship to return to. The march did not turn into a clean escape route. It turned into a slow breakdown. The men hauled heavy boats and supplies, but every mile demanded more food than they had. Rations shrank, then disappeared. The cold did not just hurt, it stole strength day after day. Boots failed, fingers and toes went numb, then useless. Once weakness set in, falling behind became easy. Catching up became impossible. Starvation brought more than hunger. It brought bad decisions and bodies that could not recover. Illness spread through men already exhausted, and simple problems became fatal. Cuts did not heal. Swollen legs and failing lungs ended marches early. Some collapsed and never rose again. Others tried to drag them forward, wasting what little strength remained. The group thinned, not in one disaster, but in repeated losses that never stopped. As the numbers dropped, the evidence left behind grew darker. Later discoveries of bones showed marks that matched butchering, not animal scavenging. That pattern suggested a final, desperate choice by at least some of the last survivors. It did not mean violence started the deaths. It meant the deaths had already piled up, and hunger had stripped away the last barrier of disgust. By then, the march had stopped being a plan. It had become an ending. In the years after the men disappeared, the silence did not last. Search expeditions pushed into the same waters, hunting for anything that explained what happened after the ships became trapped. They found traces, but not answers all at once. Then came the breakthrough, a written message recovered at Victory Point. It fixed dates to disaster. It confirmed the ships stayed locked in ice, and it recorded the decision that changed everything. That note did more than report facts. It pointed investigators to the path the survivors attempted on foot. As searches continued, scattered remains and abandoned equipment began turning up along the route south from King William Island. The pattern mattered. It showed a retreat that broke down over distance, not a single sudden loss at sea. Piece by piece, the expedition stopped being a mystery and became a chain of documented failures and deaths. Inuit testimony became the other half of the record. Accounts collected over time described meetings, camps, and men weakening as they travelled, and they matched the locations where searchers later found bones and relics. These reports carried details outsiders could not invent, and they guided where to look next. Together, the written note, the physical remains, and Inuit knowledge locked into place. The missing voyage turned into a confirmed catastrophe with its ending traced on the ground. In the 21st century, the mystery stopped being only a land story. In 2014, investigators located Erebus on the seafloor. 2 years later, in 2016, they found Terror 2. Those discoveries did not deliver a simple ending. They created a new starting point. Because a wreck did not just mark where a ship sank, it held clues about what the crew still believed and what they had already lost. Modern teams use detailed mapping, sonar, and careful dives to record the ships the way crime scene workers recorded evidence. Measurements replaced guesses. Positions replaced legends. Every plate, tool, and broken fitting helped narrow timelines and test old claims. Forensic work on human remains, paired with Inuit knowledge and earlier finds, helped connect injuries and illness to real decisions. The confidence of 1845 met the realities those men could not map or measure. And the same question kept pulling everything into focus. Why did they abandon the ships at all? The wrecks showed that both vessels stayed in the region, which meant leaving them did not instantly deliver safety. Research turned the abandonment order into a turning point, not a footnote. It shaped how supplies got used, how strength got spent, and how far the survivors could go. The ships stayed behind. The consequences went with them.